Hello humans! Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here. This is a Kizer comet. I've had this guy a little bit more than a year now, and I'm just now getting around to talking about it. So let's break it down. First thing first, this is the comet model from Kizer, like I said. This is about $132 from House of Knives right now. I picked it up when it was on clearance, which, immediate detour, my apologies. One of the main reasons why I think more people should just go to in-person stores and stuff like that when they can, you can get floor models. Like, when a knife is no longer the most popular thing in the world, or when it's like no longer new, so they don't want to display it anymore, they can't typically put display models on the online website. So what they'll do is they'll sell open box models at clearance prices. I got this for less than $80 because they still sell them. You can still buy it through House of Knives. But the House of Knives that I went to needed to take it off display, so they had it in their clearance section for literally less than $80. Comes with all the fixing. It had some fingerprints on it because it was literally the model that you could go into the store and play with. But like, almost $50. Oh yeah, about $50 in savings, literally, just because I went in person. So go in person, support brick and mortar. Brick and mortar's awesome. Anyways, so yeah, like I said, I've had this guy over a year now, actually. There has been at least 3 different versions that I know about. There's obviously the brass, and this was originally like a greener micarta. And then there's a copper and more natural kind of micarta color that's available right now. And there has been, on and off, I don't know if it still is, a blackwash copper and red micarta version. That's really, really nice as well. In terms of blade, 154 cm blade. You have sort of this long clip point blade with, I need to double check this, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, with a flat grind. So it does end up being pretty slicey. It's not a very tall blade, so it's not super, super thin behind the edge, but it's also not a very thick blade, which overall does lead to this to being a very slicey knife, despite not being necessarily the tallest grind height. It's also very, very pokey. The long clip point, coupled with what is in effect a distal taper, with the swedge and everything, just means that this is a really, really good knife for like puncturing into and making those cuts through, especially fibrous material. I find cutting open feed bags and stuff like that with this is an absolute dream. In terms of overall profile, this is very much a modern traditional in a lot of ways. It's very similar to like sort of a Texas or California toothpick style knife, with the very long clip point, not a very tall blade. The handle profile is different, however. So you end up with a much more modernized sort of almost pillbox handle, which is pretty nice. Access to the lock bar is absolutely phenomenal. It's well cut out, so as you can see, the cutout on the show side scale is pretty low, which means your access is really, really good. And it's an extremely easy knife to manipulate running on bearings. Very, very smooth, as you can see there. It is surprisingly rattly sounding. There's no like play anywhere. It's just for whatever reason, and it doesn't feel like jittery or anything, but for whatever reason, there's a lot of bearing sounds produced by this knife. Which I'm not entirely sure why that is the case, but it is. You have proper brass bolsters in the front, which is pretty cool, with micarta pivot rings and then micarta scales in the back. The brass bolsters are done in a pretty interesting way too. If you see this screw right here, it's not just there to hold the actual the scale in place. There is actually a lowered section of the bolsters that goes in behind and is screwed on as well, which in effect means that the bolsters are held on with the pivot screw and the secondary screw, and then the actual scale is held on with this middle screw and this rear screw. And on the back, of course, you have the pocket clip screw. One-sided only pocket clip, which does kind of suck. I don't think it would really take anything away to have it on 2 sides, but it is a milled pocket clip, which is kind of interesting for these. It's, like I said, it's not quite a budget knife when you buy it at retail, but it's not a super duper expensive knife either. And you don't see tons of milled clips on these less expensive knives, which I just think is, I mean, it's fine. It's kind of interesting, though. 154 cm is a steel I absolutely rate. I think it's a very good steel for this sort of lower upgraded category kind of a price point, and definitely the budget zone. I think it's super, super nice. And even past that, it's a really good steel for whittling. It's a really good steel for everyday tasks. It's not too hard to touch up, but it still does hold a decent edge, and its stain resistance, I mean, it's not going to be like the most stainless thing in the world, but its stain resistance is high enough to where it is quite comfortable to use. So overall, I actually really like all of the elements of this. Aesthetically, like I said, very modern traditional. You have that very classic brass bolster, which nobody's going to argue isn't a very classic element at this point. Micarta handles, which especially through use, like you can see how much I've carried this, how much oils and stuff like that it's just taken off my hands and from being in my pocket, which creates a very organic sort of feel to it. Micarta, in a way that G10 doesn't, will really become affected by its use and user, which means that it does become like a very natural sort of environmental organic thing, which I think is really cool, which is somewhat reminiscent of like wood on traditional knives, right? The way that that'll wear being in and out of your pocket and in and out of your hand all day. And then couple that off with that long clip point blade, which again is very reminiscent of a lot of classic knives. So overall, this is very much a modern traditional. And in that regard, it is on the smaller side. So I'm going to do some size comparisons real quick. Here it is next to the Civivi Chevalier and the WE Knives Banter. And whilst it is a very small amount longer than the Banter, that's only because of its handle length. In terms of actual blade length, if I line up the front of the two scales, the actual blade is a little bit shorter. But it does have that longer handle, which makes it more comfortable to hold for sure, which is quite nice. But this does fit very narrowly into what I consider to be the medium knives category. And then, just because I always do it, here it is next to a Buck 110 and a Zippo lighter. And closed. Next to a Buck 110. As you can see, it is actually a relatively thick knife. And I do think that that does contribute a little bit to its ergonomics. It's actually a little bit thicker even than the Zippo, you can see. Not by a lot, but a little bit. Because this knife isn't very tall, but is a little bit wider, you end up with a somewhat square-feeling object in the hand, especially when you take into account the pocket clip, which I find very comfortable in the hand. Like, it doesn't raise any hot spots or anything like that, but it does make a very square-feeling profile, which means that in this position here, it's very well indexed. It feels very natural in the hand in this more gorilla grip or saber grippy kind of grips. It's very, very square, ergonomic, very well indexed, which makes this a very comfortable knife to use for an extended period of time. It doesn't have sharp corners anywhere. Like, you can even see the milling on the corners just rounding it out a little bit. So it's not uncomfortable, but this wider, flatter stance just means that it's so naturally fitting in the hand, which makes this a really, really nice, comfortable knife to use. This was designed by Paul Munko, who I have to give props to. I haven't seen any of his designs that I'm not a big fan of. He's done, the ones in particular that popped into my mind are the Mystics and the Clairvoyant with bolsters. He's done collaborations with other companies than Kizer too, and I took a look at his website while I was just putting all of my ducks in a row for this video, and he loves bolsters. I love bolsters, so that in general is going to get me to absolutely rate him. And all of his designs, from the ones that I've handled, including his other Kizer designs, to some of the stuff he's done with other companies that I haven't had the opportunity to handle yet, seem really, really nice. So Paul Munko, super cool stuff. Check him out if you get the chance. Yeah. The other thing that I really do appreciate about this is that it is such an easy to manipulate liner lock. I'm a huge fan of liner locks. I prefer them quite a bit over frame locks, especially because they're very difficult to overbend. And this one here, in particular, due to that really, really good access, and it's a fairly thick liner in comparison to the blade thickness, which isn't a lot, means it feels very, very secure for a liner lock. Let's check out blade stock thickness real quick. So this is under a 3-inch blade, if that matters for you. It's not going to affect everybody, but some people it's going to matter. So, in terms of thickness, we have a little bit less than 110 thousandths. So, 106.5. So 106 thousandths, 105 thousandths probably. So it is a fairly thin blade, and it does make a phenomenal slicer, especially out towards this bellied section. I think another reason I appreciate this so much is it makes a great companion knife to a fixed blade for those smaller tasks. And it does have that flat belly section that I super duper love, coupled with some belly and a really accessible, easy tip. Yeah, for so many reasons I love this thing. If you're into like cowboy cosplay, especially like a modern sci-fi cowboy, this is a knife that I think is very easy to put in your pocket because of that blend of modern and traditional elements, because it is on the smaller side, and folding knives for a historical context typically run smaller. There's a lot of reasons that I can make up as to why this is a great knife for a sci-fi cowboy, but just in general, this is a phenomenal little knife, and I do think that it was a knife that kind of got blown over very, very quickly. So yeah, Kizer Comet, I'd pick one up. Super, super nice little guy, mainstay of my personal collection. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.